Hello everyone, so today we'll be taking a look at the Sony RX100 Mark IV, which is my favorite pocketable camera. So we'll be taking a look at the camera itself, how it differs from its previous models, as well as what I like and don't like about the camera, and I'll finish up with sort of an image quality overview and some suggestions as to whether this camera is for you, and if it's not, what I think are possibly alternatives and better choices. So the Sony RX100 Mark IV was recently released. It's got a lot of unique features, but I'll start with what I like about it. The best thing about this camera is the fact that it can fit into a pocket. If it was any bigger, I wouldn't buy it because as a camera, it's good. It's not exceptional, but what sets it apart and what makes it really unique is the form factor and the fact that it's thin and light enough that you can fit in a pocket and carry around with you every day, all day long. So what do I like about this camera? I like the fact that it has a tilting back screen that you can tilt back up for selfies, and you can also tilt up and down. So if you're taking pictures down low or up high, it's very easy to take those pictures. I also like the fact that it has a very useful zoom range. So it has a 24 to 70mm equivalent lens on the front, which goes from f1.8 to f2.8, which is a very useful focal length range for those of you who usually shoot around that focal length. What I also like about the camera is the fact that it's very small, it's very light, but it's also very well built. So there's a lot of sort of magnesium shell around the camera that protects it and keeps it quite tough. And I also like the fact that it's built very solidly as well. So there's no flex, there's not a lot of plastics, doesn't feel like it's going to break anytime soon. So the sensor that's inside this camera is a notionally 1-inch sensor. Now they call it a 1-inch sensor, but that has to do with something way back, and the size of the sensor itself actually has nothing to do with an inch at all. It's actually a very small sensor, so it comes in around about 1/9 of the area of a full frame sensor, or it's around about a little bit smaller than a micro 4/3 sensor. So in saying that, it's not a large sensor, it doesn't have great light capturing ability, but it is much larger than sort of most other pocket cameras, which use around about a 1/17 or a 1/2 sensor, which is even smaller than 1 inch. Now what I like about this camera is the fact that it has a lot of features. So it has full manual controls, so you can shoot in sort of your PASM modes. It's really easy to set the shutter speed and the aperture should you so desire, and it also shoots very nice video. So it shoots 4K video at 24, 25 and 30 frames a second, 100 megabits per second. And the only sort of issue that I have with the 4K recording is the fact that it only records 5 minutes. So that's a bit of an issue, but you always have the option of recording in 1080p. However, that's something you should take note of if you just do decide to get this camera as sort of your main video camera. That is an issue which I think is, could potentially be problematic. Now on top of that, the other issue that I have with this camera is the fact that it's very picky on its SD cards for 4K recording. It specifies that you have to use an SDXC card, not an SDHC card. So that means you can only use cards which are 64 gigabytes or above. And it also specifies that it has to be UHS 1 U3 speed compatible. So it's all extremely technical jargon, but essentially the point that I really want to drive home is that if you're like me and you've been using a variety of different SD cards, even if they work for 4K recording, they won't work in this guy. So I use a Samsung Pro, which is quite old now. It came out before all these ratings were introduced. It works fine on my Panasonic G7. It works fine on the GH4 for 4K recording, also 100 megabits per second. But it doesn't work on this RX100 Mark IV. It just spits out an error. It refuses to record altogether. It's not good. I also bought a new SanDisk, which is a UHS 1 U3 speed card, but it's only 32 gigs and therefore SDHC, and it refuses to record on that as well, despite being the same speed as an SDXC UHS 1 U3 type card. So I think that's something that it's a bureaucratic decision from someone at Sony who thought, you should tell people what to do. And I can understand that for the target type of, for the target audience of this camera, it's a pocket camera. It might better the usability of the camera, and it might sort of lead to less criticism and less negative feedback should the 4K recording not work. But I think for most photographers who are aware of what recording in 4K requires and who have the memory cards that they want to use in this camera but can't use. I think that is a genuine issue, and I wish that Sony, gave people an option as to being able to use a more diverse type of memory card. So I think that's sort of the main con of this camera. Now, apart from that, I really like this camera, and in my opinion, the image quality that comes out of it is excellent. It's very good for a pocket camera. At the pixel level, it doesn't compare, obviously, in any way, shape, or form to a full frame camera. It's not as good as Micro Four Thirds, though, they're sort of on some sort of a comparable league. But in terms of actually viewing these images at sizes that most people view them at, it does extremely well. So for screen, if you're viewing it just on a 1080p screen, it's excellent. If you're just viewing it on a phone or a tablet, it's also excellent. I wouldn't necessarily make large prints from this camera, but if you're making something like a 4x5 or an 8x10 print, then I think that this camera is definitely sufficient. So what is this camera actually for? And would I recommend this camera for someone who intends to get it as their primary or their only camera? That is a really complicated and difficult question to answer, because I believe that everyone's usage situations and everyone's preferences are a bit different. There are things I like about this camera, there are things I dislike about this camera, but overall I think it makes an excellent camera for travel purposes, for any time where you might not want to carry a large camera, or when you want to just be able to put it into your pocket. For people who carry around, say, a handbag or a side bag or a messenger bag at all times, then I think you're better off going with something slightly larger but offering better image quality, something maybe like the Panasonic GM5 or one of the Olympus Pen series. And they give you access to a wider variety of Micro Four Thirds lenses, and they also have better controls and just a better shooting experience, but you do lose out on certain features such as 4K recording. I know that Panasonic do intend to release a GM7, which I believe will include 4K recording, so that's something to keep your eye out for as well. Now, the RX100 Mark III is what I would consider sort of really a secondary camera. It's for photographers, clearly, because of the excellent features and controls that it has. It's created for photographers who know how to use their camera, but maybe who won't be using it as their primary camera. It works well for me when I want to sort of go out and have lunch or have dinner and not have to carry a big DSLR or even a Micro Four Thirds camera, such as the camera I'm recording on right now, the Panasonic G7, which is still quite a bit bulky. So I think this sort of fills the gap between a phone camera and a larger, mirrorless or DSLR type camera. So I think it fits in that sort of niche really well. Now, what do I think about the value of this camera? I think it is terrible value. It's a very expensive camera. I bought this in Australia for 1.1k, so $1,100. And do I think that it's worth that much at all? I don't really think it's worth that much, but you do pay a really hefty premium for its small size. If you have $1,100, there are plenty of other options available that I think will give you much better pictures. Even if you're into Sony, they have the A6000, which is around I think it's around $600-700. So for around $1,100, you really can get an A6000 and a couple of nice primes. So for the price you're paying for this, you're not getting as good image quality as the A6000, which probably has a sensor that's 4 times as large or something in that domain, and it's going to provide you with much superior image quality and handling. So that really sort of amplifies or exemplifies the fact of why I'm calling this camera much more of a secondary camera. It serves a very useful niche, but I think it's a niche that not many people really require, and if you need a small camera, it works great, but if you don't, then there are plenty of other better options out there for you. So what do I like about this camera? I like the fact that it can produce great images. So I'll pop some images up on screen right now so you can sort of see what I mean as I'm talking about its image quality. Now, its image quality is excellent. I really like the fact that I can take pictures that I can post on Instagram or pictures that I can sort of share on Flickr that are only going to be viewed on screens with this camera and have them be perfectly sharp and also perfectly colored and acceptably without noise unless it's in really, really dim lighting conditions. And I like the fact that for small prints, it works extremely well as well. Now, you have to be aware of the limitations that this camera has, but I think that that's something you should be familiar with if you're looking for a small camera that's in this form factor. Compared with other cameras that are around the same size as this is clearly just a lot better, more superior. There's no competition around the same size that will offer you anywhere near the same image quality. Now, in terms of the features that I actually like about the camera, I like the fact that it has built-in Wi-Fi. So a lot of cameras these days have built-in Wi-Fi, but I find the Wi-Fi on the RX100 Mark IV works particularly well. So that allows me to transfer images to my phone for sharing when I'm on the go, so I don't have to sort of go back and hook it up to a computer. That's always really convenient and it's a useful feature. I use it a lot to share images, so I think that's something that's worthwhile and a valuable inclusion, as well as NFC, which makes it a lot easier to connect. So you can just connect by tapping the two together. You don't have to sort of muck around with the settings and going into the Wi-Fi settings and trying to get them to connect the way that you used to with older type Wi-Fi cameras. Now, in terms of how this differs to the RX100 Mark III, and why I decided to get the Mark IV over the Mark III, I think there are two major differences apart from, sort of minor aesthetic differences. The first difference is the fact that this can record 4K video. Now, that might or might not be important to you, I don't know, but be aware of the fact that it's extremely fussy with SD cards when it tries to record 4K videos. You need a UHS-1 U3 type card that is 64 gigabytes or above. It will not record to 32 gigabyte cards or smaller. And also the fact that it only records 4K for 5 minutes. So that is an issue if you intend to use this camera sort of, for what I'm doing right now, for even just talking to the camera and doing sort of tutorials and videos. 5 minutes is a really, really short amount of time to have to click, record again and again. Now, the major difference, however, isn't just the 4K video. It has another extremely important feature which I feel is not as well documented. That's the fact that you can set the minimum shutter speed when you use auto ISO. So if you're like me, I always shoot in aperture priority. It's the only mode I shoot in. And when I shoot in aperture priority, I always use auto ISO. So for example, I'll shoot at f2.8, for example, and I set the auto ISO with a minimum shutter speed depending on, the situation that I'm in. For example, if I'm going out in bright daylight and I'm shooting on the streets and sort of clicking along as I'm walking, I tend to set the minimum shutter speed very high. So something like 1/320th of a second or 1/250th of a second. And that allows me to walk and sort of capture on the run without having to be too disciplined in my shots and standing really still, or I'm sort of making sure that the subjects aren't moving when I click that shutter. So that's something that I particularly, like to be able to adjust. Now, on the RX100 Mark III, it wouldn't allow you to set a minimum shutter speed, whereas on this, it will. So for example, if I'm shooting static subjects, I will set the minimum shutter speed much lower, allowing me to use lower ISOs, or letting the camera select lower ISOs to be able to get cleaner images. And if I'm shooting, really fast moving, fast paced subjects, then I'll select a higher minimum shutter speed, which forces the camera to select higher ISOs, but then doesn't expose me to motion blur. So that's one of the most important reasons, and that's one of the reasons why I chose to go with the RX100 Mark IV over the Mark III. In terms of accessories, it comes with a wrist strap, it comes with a USB type charger. You can charge this camera via USB. I don't like the fact that it doesn't come with a dedicated charger. That means if you own sort of a couple of batteries, you'll have to sort of put them into the camera and charge them that way. You can't do what I usually do, which is to put one battery in the charger and charge and then go out and shoot with the other battery. So that is a pain, but I think, there are ways of working around that, including purchasing a third-party charger for the batteries if you so desire. Now, in conclusion, what do I think about the RX100 Mark IV from Sony? I think that the RX100 Mark IV is a very unique camera, and it's a camera which is in a position to demand the high price that it's asking. So unlike something like the Panasonic LX100 or the Panasonic GM5, this is genuinely a camera that you can put inside your pocket. If you look at something like the Panasonic GM5, it is a small camera, but it's not thin enough to put into your pocket. It's more sort of a handbag or a messenger bag type camera. This is unique in that it provides extremely good image quality, an image quality that most photographers would be happy with in a pocketable form factor. And that's why Sony charges so much for this camera. It's really expensive. So I think overall and in conclusion, this isn't a camera that I would recommend to most people. It's a good camera for travel. It's a good camera for keeping on your body at all times in case there's something you want to shoot. It's a good camera to take to locations where, you know, a big camera might be too unwieldy or might look goofy or stupid. But it's not a camera that I would recommend that everyone rush out and buy. It's not a camera that I recommend, you know, beginning photographers to buy at all. There are plenty of other options available at close to this price range that I think would suit your needs much better. I mentioned the A6000 before. The Panasonic GM5 is also another great option, such as, and also the Olympus Pen series is also another great option. And you can get a variety of micro four thirds lenses with that and still get in for cheaper than this Sony camera and still have a small but not as small form factor. So overall, that wraps up my video on the Sony RX100 Mark IV. It's a camera that I like a lot. I think it's a very unique camera, but I very much think it's a special interest camera that should only be looked at by experienced photographers who are looking for a smaller compact camera to take on their travels or to take on day outs. So thanks for tuning in today, guys. Make sure you like this video, you leave comments below on what you want to see me review. I have plenty of gear here on the list, which I think I would love to take a look at. And yeah, once again, thanks for tuning in and make sure you subscribe to my channel for more videos. Thank you.